Minneapolis, summer of 1987. The evening air crackled with electricity as 80,000 souls pressed against the barriers of the outdoor stadium. The night sky had just begun to darken, the final traces of sunset giving way to the artificial glow of stage lights that illuminated plumes of fog drifting across the empty stage. For hours they had waited, bodies pressed together, united by anticipation that bordered on religious fervor. This wasn't just a concert. This was Prince, the hometown hero, the musical prodigy who had transformed from a shy Minneapolis kid into a global phenomenon. The air felt thick with expectation, a collective hunger for transcendence that only certain artists could provide. And then, darkness. Complete, consuming darkness as every light in the stadium extinguished simultaneously. The crowd inhaled as one, a sound like a great wave drawing back before crashing to shore. In that perfect darkness, 80,000 people held their breath, suspended between what had been and what was about to be. The first notes emerged without warning, a single purple spotlight revealing Prince at his piano, fingers dancing across the keys with otherworldly precision. He hadn't walked onto stage. He had manifested, as if assembled from the darkness itself. The crowd's response was physical, a wall of sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. He wore a suit cut from fabric that caught the light and transformed it, shifting from deep purple to midnight blue with each movement. His face, partially obscured by those signature sunglasses despite the night hour, revealed nothing yet. He was still in that sacred space between Prince Rogers Nelson, the man, and Prince, the icon, the boundary increasingly blurred with each passing year. The opening notes of Little Red Corvette filled the stadium, but transformed, slowed down, reimagined as something more intimate, more vulnerable than the version that lived on vinyl in millions of homes. This was Prince's gift, the ability to make even his most familiar works feel dangerously new, as if hearing them for the first time. 10 minutes stretched into 30 into an hour, each song flowing seamlessly into the next, the energy building with meticulous precision. Prince moved from piano to guitar to center stage, his band responding to his slightest gesture as if connected by invisible threads. The crowd moved as one organism, following his lead, rising and falling with each shift in tempo and mood. This was Prince at the height of his powers. 2 years after Purple Rain had transformed him from star to legend, yet still hungry, still pushing against the boundaries of what pop music could be. The performance built toward a familiar crescendo, the opening notes of Purple Rain drawing a response so loud it seemed to shake the foundations of the stadium itself. Prince stood alone at the microphone, guitar slung across his body, a momentary stillness before the storm. The crowd quieted, sensing the arrival of something sacred. It was in this perfect, pregnant moment that it happened. A voice, sharp and clear, cut through the reverent silence. A woman, somehow having made her way to the front row, center position, cupped her hand around her mouth and shouted, "Show us something real, you fake." Her words carried in that strange acoustic way that sometimes happens in large venues, when a single voice finds the perfect pitch to cut through thousands. Those closest to her turned in shock, faces registering disbelief, anger. But she wasn't finished. "All costume, no talent," she continued, her voice taking on a taunting sing-song quality. "Prince? More like Popper." Security began moving toward her, but they were slowed by the density of the crowd, the narrow spaces between bodies. On stage, Prince had gone completely still. The band, professionals to their core, continued the introduction to Purple Rain, though they exchanged glances of concern. The woman's voice carried again. "Take off those glasses and be a real man." It was impossible to know her motivation, whether she was genuinely angry, intoxicated, performing for attention, or something else entirely. What mattered was the disruption, the sudden tear in the carefully constructed atmosphere of the evening. The security team had nearly reached her now, hands outstretched to escort her from the venue. But then Prince raised his hand, a small gesture that nonetheless froze everyone in place. The music continued, but at a lower volume, as if the band instinctively understood that something unscripted was about to occur. Prince stepped forward to the edge of the stage, looking down directly at the woman. He removed his sunglasses with deliberate slowness. The stadium screens captured his face in massive detail. Those eyes, unusually expressive, holding something that wasn't anger, wasn't embarrassment, wasn't even irritation. It was curiosity, perhaps. Interest. He gestured to the security personnel to step back. Another small movement that carried immense authority. "You want something real?" His voice was quiet, yet somehow carried to every corner of the stadium. The sound system captured it, amplified it, though he wasn't speaking into the microphone. "What's your name?" The woman, perhaps shocked to have received a response at all, hesitated before answering. "Jessica," she finally said, her voice now smaller, the bravado beginning to crack. "Jessica," Prince repeated, as if testing the shape of it on his tongue. "Come up here." A murmur ran through the crowd, confusion and anticipation mingling. Security looked to Prince for confirmation, received a nod, and then helped the woman navigate the barrier between audience and stage. She climbed the steps, her movements suggesting she was already regretting her outburst, yet too committed to retreat. She stood on a massive stage, suddenly small under the revealing glare of 80,000 pairs of eyes. Prince walked toward her, each step measured, unhurried. When he reached her, he stopped, close enough that they could speak without the microphones capturing their exchange. The crowd leaned forward collectively, straining to understand what was happening. Prince turned to his band and made a cutting motion with his hand. The music stopped, leaving a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. He turned back to Jessica, whose face now showed clear discomfort, perhaps fear. But what Prince did next would be recounted differently by every person who witnessed it, interpreted and reinterpreted as the story spread. He reached out and took her hand, not aggressively, not in anger, but with a gentleness that was visible even to those watching the enormous screens from the farthest reaches of the stadium. Then he led her to the piano at the side of the stage. They sat together on the bench, two figures under a single spotlight, the contrast between his stage costume and her ordinary concert attire stark and somehow poignant. "I was a boy from Minneapolis who couldn't speak to his own father," Prince said, his voice now directed into the microphone positioned near the piano. "I had seizures. I was made fun of. I found my voice through this." His fingers touched the keys, not playing yet, just resting there. "So when you asked for something real," he looked directly at Jessica, whose face had transformed from defiance to something much more complex. "I'll give you the realest thing I know." And then he began to play. Not Purple Rain, not any of his hits, but something new, something created in that moment. His fingers found chords that seemed to capture everything: vulnerability, pain, transcendence, hope. After a few measures, he began to sing. The lyrics, improvised yet precise, spoke of masks, of the personas we create to protect our truest selves, of the courage required to be seen. As the song built, Prince turned to Jessica again. "Sing with me," he said, not a command but an invitation. For a moment, it seemed she would refuse, retreat, ask to leave the stage. The tension was unbearable. 80,000 people collectively holding their breath again. And then, miraculously, she began to sing. Hesitantly at first, her voice thin with nerves, but growing stronger as Prince nodded encouragement. They created something together, right there on that Minneapolis stage, something that existed for just a few minutes and would never exist in quite the same way again. The crowd, initially confused, then hesitant, began to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary. By the time the impromptu song reached its bridge, the entire stadium swayed together, many openly weeping at the unexpected intimacy of the moment. What had begun as a disruption had transformed into the kind of genuine human connection that transcends entertainment and enters the realm of communion. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that remind us of music's power to transform confrontation into connection. These rare glimpses behind the carefully constructed personas of our greatest artists reveal the humanity that makes their art resonate across time and circumstance. As the song came to its natural conclusion, Prince and Jessica sat in silence for a moment, the final notes hanging in the air. Then he reached up and removed the intricately designed brooch that had fastened his jacket, a small purple guitar, studded with what appeared to be amethysts. He placed it in Jessica's palm, closing her fingers around it gently. "Keep this," he said, his voice low but still captured by the microphone, as a reminder that what's real isn't always what's visible. She nodded, tears streaming freely now, all pretense of hostility long dissolved. Prince stood, helping her to her feet, and led her to the edge of the stage where security waited to escort her back to the audience. But before she descended the steps, she turned back. "I'm sorry," she said, the words catching in her throat. Prince shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Don't be," he replied. "You just helped create something beautiful." As Jessica was led back to her place in the crowd, the atmosphere in the stadium had transformed completely. What had been an excellent concert had become something else entirely, a shared experience that transcended entertainment. Prince returned to center stage, retrieved his guitar, and launched into Purple Rain with renewed intensity. But something had changed in how the crowd received it. The song, always emotional, now carried additional layers of meaning, context enriched by what they had just witnessed. When Prince reached the extended guitar solo, he closed his eyes, his face revealing the complete surrender to music that had defined his life since childhood. The crowd swayed as one, hands raised not in the typical gesture of concert appreciation, but in something closer to religious reverence. Backstage, after the final encore, after the lights had come up and the crowd began the slow process of dispersing, Prince's manager approached him cautiously. "That was unplanned," he said, the statement both observation and question. Prince, in the process of removing his stage makeup, met his manager's eyes in the mirror. "The best things usually are," he replied. Then, after a pause, "Find her. Make sure she's okay." His manager nodded, already reaching for his radio to communicate with security. "And John," Prince added, "no interviews about this. Not for her, not for us." It was unnecessary instruction. Everyone on Prince's team understood his fierce protection of genuine moments. The manufactured narratives of publicists and music journalists were one thing, easily managed, easily dismissed. But authenticity, those rare moments when the barriers between artist and audience truly dissolved, those were sacred, not to be commodified or diluted through retelling. Jessica would later tell friends that security had found her in the parking lot after the show, escorted her to a private area where a member of Prince's team asked if she was all right, if she needed anything. She showed them the brooch, still clutched tightly in her hand, and asked if Prince wanted it back. The team member smiled and shook his head. "It's yours now," he said. "He wanted you to have it." When she tried to explain her outburst, the words tumbling out in emotional disarray, something about a bad breakup, about feeling invisible, about lashing out at the wrong target. He stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He understands," was all he said. Then he offered her a card with a number. "If you ever need help," he explained, "this connects to a mental health service Prince supports. Completely confidential, completely covered." It was perhaps the final act of compassion in an evening defined by the unexpected transformation of conflict into connection. In the days that followed, the music press exploded with accounts of the night. Rolling Stone called it the moment Prince transcended artistry. MTV played the grainy audience footage that had inevitably emerged, despite strict no-camera policies. Local Minneapolis papers ran headlines declaring Prince turns heckler into harmony. But none of the coverage captured the full truth of what had transpired. How could it? Those who had been present spoke of it with a reverence usually reserved for witnessing natural wonders or religious miracles. It wasn't just what he did, one attendee told the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. It was how he did it. No judgment, no ego, just humanity. As for Jessica, she disappeared from public view, declining all interview requests, returning to her life with a story she would share only with those closest to her. The purple guitar brooch took a place of honor in her home, not displayed prominently, but kept where she could see it daily, a reminder of a night her worst moment became her most profound. Years later, when Prince passed away far too young, she attended the public memorial in Minneapolis, standing quietly at the back of the crowd, the brooch pinned to her jacket. A few recognized her, approached to share their memories of that night. She listened politely, but offered little in return. Some experiences, she had learned, were too sacred for words, their meaning diminished rather than enhanced by explanation. Prince never spoke publicly about the incident. When asked in rare interviews if the story was true, he would smile that enigmatic smile and change the subject. Some things, his silence suggested, were too personal to dissect for public consumption. But those close to him noted that after that night, he began a practice of leaving a single chair empty at the edge of the stage during performances. Most assumed it was an aesthetic choice or perhaps a tribute to someone lost. Only his closest confidants knew it represented an openness to the unexpected, a willingness to make space for whatever, or whoever, might emerge from the crowd, bringing disruption that could transform into connection. Years later, long after Prince had left this world, that night would still be discussed, analyzed, celebrated. Music historians would place it in context. Fans would share increasingly embellished memories. New generations would discover the shaky footage online and marvel at the chemistry between artist and antagonist-turned-collaborator. But perhaps the most telling testament came from a backup singer who had been on stage that night, who had witnessed the unplanned convergence from just a few feet away. Interviewed for a documentary in her 70s, decades after the event, she leaned forward in her chair, eyes bright with remembered wonder. "People always ask if it was rehearsed, if he planned it," she said. But that's missing the point. The magic wasn't that it happened. The magic was that he allowed it to happen. An artist at the absolute peak of his powers, secure enough in his own greatness to make space for genuine human connection. That's rare in any field. In music, in that era, with his level of fame, it was a miracle. The purple guitar brooch would eventually find its way to the Smithsonian, donated anonymously with only a brief note of provenance. The official placard offers dates, facts, context, but it's the unofficial stories that visitors share with each other as they stand before the display that capture the true significance. "My uncle was there," a young woman tells her friend. "He said when Prince gave her that brooch, the whole place went silent. Like everyone knew they were seeing something that would never happen again." Next to her, an older man nods. "I was in the nosebleed seats," he says. "Couldn't see their faces clearly, just figures on the stage. But I felt it. Everyone did. Something shifting in the universe." And perhaps that's the most accurate description of what happened that night in Minneapolis in 1987. Not a simple act of forgiveness, not a calculated public relations move, but a shift, subtle yet seismic, in what seemed possible. A reminder that even in moments of conflict and misunderstanding, genuine connection can emerge, unexpected and transformative. That music, at its best, isn't about perfection or performance. It's about creating space for authenticity, for vulnerability, for the messy truth of being human in all its complicated glory. If this video has touched you, if it has reminded you of music's power to bridge divides and create unexpected moments of beauty, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who understands that our lowest moments can sometimes lead to our most profound connections, that conflict can transform into creation in the most unexpected ways. And remember that true artistry isn't measured by technical perfection, but by the courage to remain open, even in the face of criticism or attack. In a small coffee shop in Minneapolis, not far from First Avenue where Prince first made his name, a middle-aged woman sits alone, reading a book. Nothing marks her as special. She could be anyone, everyone. But if you look closely, pinned to the collar of her jacket is a small purple guitar. It catches the light as she moves, drawing the eye with its quiet beauty. Occasionally, someone recognizes it, approaches with tentative curiosity. "Is that?" They begin, leaving the question unfinished. Sometimes she smiles and changes the subject. Sometimes, if the person seems genuinely connected to the music, to the memory, she shares a small piece of the story. Never all of it. Some parts remain hers alone. Yes, she'll say, touching the brooch gently. It was a night when I was seen at my worst, and somehow, it became the moment I started to find my best. Then she'll return to her book, the conversation complete. The brooch continues to catch the light. A small purple reminder that sometimes our greatest connections emerge from our moments of deepest disconnection. That music at its most powerful doesn't just entertain. It transforms, it heals, it creates bridges where before there were only walls.